Hi there. So today, before I take apart my 15-tone keyboard and turn it into a 17 for a special occasion, I'd like to talk about the Porcupine scale, as it's commonly called. Now, this scale is usually thought of as either a 7-note mode or an 8-note mode. And what's really helpful about the 15-tone equal tempered keyboard is that the 7-note mode happens on the black keys and the 8-note mode happens on the white keys. Although, of course, it's pink here. So, with Porcupine, we have an interesting situation. We have triads. Like, let's say I just wanted to start on the first black key and play these. It's a diminished chord with something like a 16/11 on top, which is a just interval. But then if I keep going and cross this break, I get a perfect fifth on top, so I start to get triads. And then we're sort of back to that diminished chord. So Porcupine has a really asymmetrical structure in terms of triads, and it's also very small, so it's extremely different from the diatonic scale, because you can kind of think about it like a whole tone scale. If we have whole steps here that are small, which aren't really whole steps, you know, but they're they're about a whole step, they're a little bit smaller. You could call it a neutral second, although lots of people object to that. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then a big step. So you have a big step at the end, and then 6 smaller steps. What the 8-note mode does is it simply adds another step in between those, so that the odd step out becomes the small step instead of the large one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then back to 1. So that would be sort of what the 8-note mode would be like. So people don't really have a standard way to start on any given note in a Porcupine mode, but it's generally agreed that you should probably use a major or a minor one, because diminished chords tend to not sound very resolved on their own. Of course, you can make them sound that way, but to introduce a listener to major and minor sorts of things, it's really good to be able to start on these kinds of chords here. So, basically, the rule for Porcupine 7, or the mode with 6 small steps and 1 large step, is that if your 3 notes that you are using, or your thirds in the scale, go over the large step, then it's going to create a triad. So there are 2 minor triads next to each other, and then there are 2 major triads right next to each other. So I've seen a lot of people say that the mode that they should use is the one that has the higher major chord, because then that way there's a subtonic here. Or at least that's what it sounds like. It kind of sounds like 1 flat 7 1, although it's not really that, because it's a little bit different. And then if you have 1, 7, then you have 6, and then 5. Although this 5, of course, doesn't really act like the traditional one. Because it's a minor chord. To ear train the Porcupine scale, I recommend thinking of the 7-note mode and trying to sort of visualize things in a compressed way. So, if we're singing something stepwise in a Porcupine mode, chances are that you're going to be splitting the minor third in half. So first, figuring out what your minor third sounds like is a good idea. So if this is a minor third, try to go kind of like, what you could do is you could sing to yourself do, re, mi, but then work on pushing mi down so flat that it becomes a minor third. Do, re, mi, do, re, mi, do, re, mi, do, re, mi. See, I was a little bit low there, but you get the idea that you're putting something in between. So it's actually a lot like quarter tones in the immediate moment, but then as you go farther up and up the scale, it's going to reach bizarre new territory quickly. So I recommend sort of treating it like a whole tone scale and then really pushing down. Do, 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 do. And then that last step, of course, is the large one. So basically, just knowing where your large step is and getting used to the sound of the neutral second and splitting a minor third in half stepwise will go a long way. And of course, you can also have perfect fourths, but you can also have, well, I guess tritones if you're talking about what's close to 12 equal, but if you're talking about just intonation, things that are close to the 11 limit, the 11 over 8 and the 16 over 11. So those also sort of sound like quarter tones. So really, in Porcupine, you can think of a lot of the immediate relationships between intervals as sounding like quarter tone intervals in your ear, but then you have to, of course, remember that the structure doesn't line up with that at all. So if you're singing longer passages, things won't line up as well exactly. Now, I should also talk about, the Porcupine 8 mode, which I guess is down here. So let's try singing this scale together. And remember, each note apart in 15 is like 160 cents. So sort of think of it like in between a major and a minor second. And then, of course, every third one is a minor third, except for these last few notes. The 8th note of Porcupine 8 kind of messes up our little triad formation because we can go in every third here, right? And then when we start incorporating this note, it starts to make adjacent notes here not sound like triads as much. It sort of makes it all sound like diminished chords. So we can sort of think of it like Porcupine 7 with an extra note. Or we can just skip it for a while. We have two options here. Now this kind of sounds like a suspended chord and not like a typical triad. Two options there, major or minor chord. And then of course here, we're basically kind of past it. So, yeah, that 8th note just gives you extra options. Okay, let's try singing this and going up and down. We can just sing scale degree numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I find that when I'm singing this scale, it has similar melodic vibes to 7-tone equal temperament, except with a little bit of inequality at the end. So if you think about that sort of feeling in your voice, if you've ever sung in 7-tone equal temperament, I think that'll help you when it comes to like finding places to stop and thinking that those are right. So you can use a mentality of quarter tones to find certain individual notes, and a mentality of 7-tone equal tempered like flavor to sort of get a feel of the scale, even though of course it's completely different than 7-tone equal temperament and the chords will sound a little bit more in tune. I also should mention, of course, that this is mostly a Porcupine video because with ear training different modes, you can make the step sizes different amounts. So in 22-tone equal temperament, the Porcupine 7 scale, or 6 small steps and 1 large step, that scale will sound pretty similar in 22. But then when you add the 8th note to make it Porcupine 8, or having 7 large steps and 1 small step, it will sound quite a bit different because the 22-tone small step in that scale sounds more like a quarter tone than 15s. 15s sounds like a semitone. So probably the 15 one is easier to sing, but the 22 will sound a little bit more in tune vertically in general. This is, of course, also a mode where if you play with the step sizes, you can get some really wacky modes really quick. If you have one of a certain kind of step and then all the other steps are simply a different fixed size, you can make that one step absolutely giant and create a super unequal scale. So we're not really dealing with that kind of mode here, even though we're talking about ear training those modes. Because it's generally assumed that if you are playing with a mode, the notes within one octave will be regularly spaced out in such a way that stepwise motion can happen. So not super, super angular. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about ear training, this scale, the Porcupine scale. And calling it the Porcupine scale ensures that it will be in that range of what we consider to be a pretty singable or usable mode where things aren't really angular. Okay, so I hope you liked this video. Again, Porcupine 7 is the black keys, and Porcupine 8 is the white keys. Pretty cool.